to a penitentiary.
All the time back to my husband.
She is the most dangerous woman in the British prison system.
That makes me so good. Room sexy.
That the more she did it and got away with it, the more she was motivated to keep on doing it.
When we think of history's most notorious criminals, our minds often jump to men, the Jack the Rippers, the Ted Bundys, the Al Capones of the world. But today, we're about to dive into a world where the ladies aren't just keeping up with the guys, they're giving them a run for their money in the worst way possible. That's right, we're talking about some of the most shocking female criminals in history. These aren't your average bad girls. These are women who committed acts so horrific, so bone-chillingly cruel, that they make even the toughest guys look like Boy Scouts. But here's the thing, we're not here to glorify these women or their crimes. We're going to see just how messed up their actions were and how they ruined not just their victims' lives, but their own too. As we go through each case, ask yourself, how did these women end up this way? Could anyone have stopped them? And what would you do if you met someone like this? We're about to meet 5 of the most dangerous women in history. Their stories might shock you, disgust you, or even make you a little scared. But hey, that's the point. Let's get started, shall we? Joanna Dene. Imagine you're walking down the street in a quiet English town. You see a woman with a big smile on her face. Seems friendly, right? Well, if it's 2013 and you're in Peterborough, that woman might just be Joanna Dene, and she might be about to kill you. Joanna Dene wasn't born evil. In fact, her childhood was pretty normal. She grew up in a nice family, did well in school, and even played on the netball team. So what happened? How did this regular girl turn into one of Britain's worst serial killers? Things started to go wrong when Dene was a teenager. She started skipping school, doing drugs, and hanging out with a bad crowd. By the time she was in her 20s, she had 2 kids, but couldn't take care of them. That's when the really dark stuff started.
Would you be cheering if you got 30 to no, but I was just smiling. Attempted murder, or something. So going down for Sunday Rose?
In March 2013, Dene killed for the first time. Her victim was a Polish man named Łukasz Slabaszewski. She stabbed him and stuffed his body in a trash bin. And that all seems pretty brutal. But Dene was just getting started.
You must get calls about missing people regularly. What was different this time?
A few days later, she killed again. This time, it was her housemate, John Chapman. And then, as if 2 murders weren't enough, she went after her landlord, Kevin Lee, who she was also reportedly involved with romantically. Not only that, but the details around the crime suggested that it brought Joanna some level of enjoyment, at least judging by the fact that his body was found wearing a sequined dress.
First thing that came into my head was, this guy's been humiliated, he's been put in this position. That was the challenge around understanding why this one was different, and it was very, very different.
The way the body had been posed had all the hallmarks of a deeply disturbed killer at work.
3 people dead, all stabbed to death by Dene. But here's the really crazy part. Dene wasn't done just yet. She went on the run and ended up in another town called Hereford. There, she randomly stabbed 2 guys who were just out walking their dogs. Luckily, these men survived, and when the police finally caught Dene, they couldn't believe her demeanor. She was laughing and joking about the murders. She even flirted with law enforcement and bragged about the killings. It was like she thought it was all a big game.
Big fat I love your eyebrows. Thanks. You're decent, copper. That makes me so good. Room sexy.
So, what makes someone like Joanna Dene tick? Doctors said she was a psychopath, which means she couldn't feel empathy for others. She killed because she thought it was fun.
She is the most dangerous woman in the British prison system.
She's buzzing, isn't she? This is primarily this sort of euphoria and the buzz, which is continuing as a result of what she's done.
Can you imagine thinking that taking someone's life is entertaining? What's more, her attitude during her trial was just as surprising. Dene ended up pleading guilty to all the murders without giving it a second thought. It's almost as if she didn't really see a problem with the lives she ruined.
Well, this was a plea that nobody was expecting, Simon. It was supposed to be just a standard court appearance before trial, and the trial date is still fixed for later this year. But suddenly, when asked how she plead, Joanna Dene, who's 30 and from Peterborough, stood up and said that she pleaded guilty to the 11 charges against her.
The judge gave her a whole life sentence, which means she'll never get out of prison. She's only the third woman in UK history to get this punishment. Now, think about this. Dene went from being a normal kid to a serial killer. What do you think went wrong? Could someone have stopped her before she killed? And how would you feel if you found out someone you knew was capable of such horrible things? Maryanne Cotton. Let's hop in our time machine and go back to the 1800s in England. Life was tough back then, especially if you were poor. But for Maryanne Cotton, it seemed like bad luck followed her everywhere. Or did it? Maryanne was born in 1832 in a place called Durham, a city in northeast England. She didn't have much money growing up, and so she got married young, hoping for a better life.
For people like Maryanne Cotton, life was a war. You had to do whatever you had to do to survive.
But then something strange started happening. Her husbands kept dying under some very mysterious circumstances. And it wasn't just her husbands, it was her kids, her mom, even her friends were dropping like flies. Now, in those days, people died from illness all the time. So at first, nobody thought much of it. But after Maryanne had lost 3 husbands, a boyfriend, her mom, and 11 of her 13 kids, people started to get suspicious. Just how unlucky can one person be before they begin looking guilty instead?
You get people dying of gastric fever, and in the case of Maryanne Cotton, she used that to great effect to explain the death of many of her husbands and children.
Well, the final straw came when Maryanne's stepson, Charles, died right after she'd taken out a life insurance policy on him. That's when people started asking questions. Turns out, Maryanne had a secret weapon. Arsenic. It's a nasty poison that makes you extremely sick right before it eventually claims your life. And the best part, well, for Maryanne anyway, was that the symptoms looked just like other common illnesses of the time.
She's looking for control of her life and of other people's lives, especially when they intrude on hers. It's a terrible kind of power, but for a woman in a century who has no power given to her, the power of arsenic might have been something almost fascinating. Power of life and death.
So why was Maryanne killing all these people? It all boils down to one thing, and that's money, plain and simple. Every time someone died, she'd collect on their life insurance or inherit their stuff. It was like she was running a deadly business with murder as the product.
I'm not so sure she'd actually got pleasure from killing. I think she got pleasure from the start of the relationship and the build-up of the relationship. And I think the killing then became an expediency. It was the way to deal with the situation. The only way you remove people, you either get rid of them and you get them out of their lives so you can move on to the next.
Eventually, the law caught up with Maryanne. They found her guilty of killing her stepson, and in 1873, she was hanged. But here's the scary part. They think she might have killed up to 21 people over 20 years. That's a lot of bodies.
I suspect that she was canny and that she knew very well that what she was doing was against the law.
Now, let's think about this for a second. Maryanne Cotton got away with murder for 2 decades. How is that possible? Well, remember, this was the 1800s. They didn't have all the fancy crime-solving tools we have today. Plus, so many people were dying from disease anyway that a few more deaths didn't seem that weird. But here's a question for you. What do you think is worse? Someone who kills in a moment of anger, or someone like Maryanne who plans it all out for money? And how do you think you would have caught her if you lived back then? Maryanne Cotton's story shows us that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't some scary-looking guy, but the nice lady next door. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How well do we really know the people around us? Aileen Wong. Now let's head to Florida in the late 1980s. Imagine you're driving down a lonely highway and you see a woman hitchhiking. She looks like she might need help too, but if that woman is Aileen Wong, you'd better keep driving because she's not looking for a ride. She's, in fact, looking for her next victim.
I robbed him and I killed him as cold as ice. And I'd do it again too, and I know I'd kill another person because I've hated humans for a long time.
Aileen had a rough start in life. Born in 1956, her dad was in prison and her mom abandoned her when she was just a kid. She ended up living with her grandparents, but life there was no picnic either. By the time she was a teenager, Aileen was already in trouble with the law and was even selling her own body for cash. Fast forward to 1989. Aileen is in her 30s now, still working the highways, but something in her has snapped.
And I gotta come clean that I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery. As they said, they had it right, a serial killer.
On November 30th, she kills her first victim, a man named Richard Mallory. She claims it was self-defense, that he tried to abuse her, but then she does it again, and again, and again.
Those men were shot, just shot in self-defense, boom, boom, boom. You know, they weren't cut up, they weren't sliced up, no OJ jazz, you know. And he said, I did the most horrendous crime in the whole wide world.
Over the next year, Aileen murders at least 6 men. Her method was always the same. She'd pose as a hitchhiker or a prostitute, get the guy to pick her up, and then shoot him. She'd rob the bodies and often take the victims' cars.
Go ahead and put the electric chair to me. I should have never done it.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Aileen had a girlfriend named Tyria Moore. Tyria wasn't involved in the killings, but she knew about them. Can you imagine finding out your partner is a serial killer?
I tried everything I could to have her stop doing that, and that I did care about her. But she never gave it up.
The law finally caught up with Aileen in January 1991. When they arrested her, she was still driving one of her victims' cars. In court, Aileen claimed all the killings were in self-defense.
Boy, I don't know about you. I'm telling you, man. No, I wasn't born bad. You guys got it. I'm trying to tell you, man, they lied. They lied so bad to you all.
But the jury didn't buy it. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. Surprisingly, Aileen seemed to want this just as much as the jury.
There's no sense in keeping me alive because I just would absolutely kill again. I've got too much anger, too much hatred in me.
In October 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. Now, here's something to think about. Aileen is often called America's first female serial killer. But we know that's not true. We've already talked about Maryanne Cotton, who committed her crimes way before Aileen was even born. So why do you think Aileen's case got so much attention? Was it because she didn't fit the usual image of a serial killer? And here's another question. Aileen had a terrible childhood and faced a lot of violence in her life. Does that explain her crimes? Can we understand why she did what she did, even if we don't excuse it?
It's making me get bitter, evil, angry. I've never been before in my life. Worse than even out there with those men. This is evil, what those people have done to me.
Aileen Wuornos' story is a sad one, from beginning to end, no doubt about it. It really makes you wonder how different things might have been if she'd had a better start in life. But it also shows that no matter how tough things get, turning to crime is never really the answer. Nanny Doss. Alright, now let's head back to the 20th century in America. Picture a sweet old grandma, always laughing and joking. Sounds nice, right? Well, meet Nanny Doss, also known as the Giggling Granny. But trust me, there's nothing amusing about what she did.
Do all the girls call you Nanny?
Most of them calls me Mommy.
Mom?
Yes, sir.
Nanny was born in 1905 in Alabama. She seemed like a normal, cheerful lady. She got married a bunch of times and was always ready with a smile or a laugh. But underneath that happy exterior was a stone-cold killer. Over 30 years, Nanny poisoned a whole bunch of people. We're talking 4 husbands, her own mother, her sister, her grandson, and even her mother-in-law. That's a lot of dead bodies. And her weapon of choice? Good old rat poison, mixed into food and drinks.
How old were you when you first got married?
16.
And how many times were you married?
5.
Why are you in penitentiary now?
Well, the claim got to my husband.
But here's the really creepy part. Nanny thought this was all hilarious. When the police finally caught her in 1954, she confessed to everything while giggling like it was the funniest joke ever. Can you imagine laughing about killing your own family? So why did Nanny do it? Well, she claimed she was looking for the perfect husband. Every time a husband disappointed her, she'd just poison him and move on to the next one. Talk about high standards. But let's think about this for a second. Nanny lived in a time when divorce was a big no-no, especially for women. Could that have played a part in her turning to murder instead of just leaving her husbands? Or was she just a cold-blooded killer who found an easy way to get rid of people?
Did they say you killed any more?
Yeah.
Than your other husband? Which other?
And here's another thing to consider. Nanny didn't look like what most people think a murderer looks like. She was a chubby, glasses-wearing grandma who was always smiling. It just goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover, right? Nanny ended up going to prison for life. She died behind bars in 1965, but her story still freaks people out today. How would you feel if you found out your grandma was secretly poisoning the whole family? So, what do you think? Could you spot someone like Nanny Doss if you met her? And what does her case tell us about how we view female criminals versus male ones? Leonardo Chien Chii. Now, let's travel to Italy in the 1930s and 40s. Picture a kindly middle-aged woman known for making great soap and delicious tea cakes. Sounds nice, right? Well, this is the story of Leonardo Chien Chii, also known as the soap maker of Correggio. Born in 1894, Leonardo didn't have an easy start in life. Her mom tried to kill her twice when she was a kid. Talk about family issues. She got married at 23 and had 17 pregnancies, but only 4 of her kids survived. But here's where it gets weird. Leonardo was super superstitious. When her oldest son was going to join the army in 1939, she got it into her head that she needed to make human sacrifices to protect him. Yeah, you heard that right. Human sacrifices. In 1939, Leonardo's first victim was a lady named Faustina Setti. She told Faustina she'd found her a husband, but instead of sending her to meet her new beau, Leonardo killed her with an axe. But that's not even the worst part. After killing Faustina, Leonardo boiled her body in caustic soda, an extremely erosive substance that can basically turn any living thing into mush. Then, she turned that liquid into soap and the leftover fat into tea cakes. And get this, she said she gave these tea cakes to her son and his friends to eat. Can you imagine unknowingly eating cakes made from human remains? But Leonardo still wasn't done. She killed 2 more women, Francesca Soavi and Virginia Cacioppo, in the same way. She even bragged later that Virginia had made great soap. Now, you might be wondering, how did she get caught? Well, Virginia's sister-in-law got suspicious when Virginia disappeared after saying she was going to see Leonardo. The police investigated and found Leonardo's cookbook, which had some pretty incriminating notes in it. When confronted, Leonardo confessed to everything. She seemed proud of what she'd done, saying she did it all for her son.
30 anni l'ergastolo e fucilazione. Ma che mi interessa a me? 17 figli. Ah, cari miei, se anche a voi moriranno 13 figli, non solo faresti ciò che ho fatto io.
In 1946, she was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. So, let's think about this for a second. Leonardo killed these women because she thought it would protect her son. Does that make her actions any less horrible, or does it make them even worse? And here's another thing to ponder. Leonardo lived through some really tough times. World War I, the rise of fascism in Italy, the start of World War II. Do you think these big historical events had any impact on her state of mind? Leonardo Chien Chii's case is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't some scary stranger, but the nice lady next door offering you tea and cookies. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How well do we really know our neighbors? In the end, Leonardo died in prison in 1970, but her bizarre and horrifying crimes continue to shock people to this day. So, next time someone offers you homemade soap or tea cakes, maybe think twice before accepting. You never know what or who might be in them. Ilsa Coke. For our last case, we're going to take a trip back in time to one of the darkest periods in human history, Nazi Germany, and we're going to meet a woman so cruel, so sadistic, that even her fellow Nazis thought she went too far. Her name, Ilsa Coke, also known as the Witch of Buchenwald. Born in 1906 in Dresden, Germany, Ilsa seemed like an ordinary girl, but as she grew up, she became fascinated with the Nazi Party and its twisted ideas. In 1936, she married Karl Otto Koch, who became the commandant of the Buchenwald concentration camp. And that's where Ilsa's true colors really came out. Now, you might be thinking, how bad could she be? She wasn't actually a guard, right? Wrong. Ilsa Coke wasn't content to be a passive bystander. She made herself the unofficial overseer of the camp, and she ruled with an iron fist.
She took it on herself to mingle in the camp's running and affairs. And it was that process that gave her the nickname among the prisoners of Capones.
Ilsa was known for her cruelty. She would ride through the camp on her horse, whipping any prisoner who caught her eye. But that's not even the worst part. Ilsa had a truly disturbing hobby. She collected the tattooed skin of prisoners. Yeah, you heard that right. Ilsa would spot prisoners with interesting tattoos and have them killed. Then, their skin would be removed and turned into grotesque souvenirs, lampshades, book covers, you name it. Can you imagine anything more horrifying?
I think Ilsa Coke was drawn into that. I think along with her husband, she began to believe that they could punish Germany's enemies in any form, however humiliating, however degrading it might be. In fact, the more humiliating, the better.
But Ilsa's reign of terror didn't last forever. In 1943, she and her husband were arrested by the Nazi authorities, not for their cruelty to prisoners. The Nazis were fine with that, but for embezzlement and private enrichment. Karl Otto was executed, but Ilsa was acquitted due to lack of evidence. However, after the war, Ilsa couldn't escape justice. She was arrested again in 1947 and put on trial for her crimes. The court heard terrifying testimonies about her sadistic behavior. Ilsa was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Now, here's a question to ponder. How does someone like Ilsa Coke happen? She wasn't born in the concentration camp. She chose to be there and chose to act the way she did. What do you think goes through the mind of someone who can treat other human beings so cruelly? And here's another thing to think about. Ilsa Coke was a woman in a very male-dominated system. Did that make her more eager to prove herself? Did it make her more cruel? Or does evil like hers have nothing to do with gender at all? Ilsa Coke's story is a reminder that sometimes the worst monsters aren't the ones giving the orders. They're the ones who enthusiastically carry them out. It shows us that ordinary people can do extraordinarily evil things if they're in the right or wrong circumstances. In the end, Ilsa Coke couldn't face the consequences of her actions. She committed suicide in prison in 1967, but the memory of her crimes lives on, a dark reminder of how low humanity can sink. So there you have it, 6 of the most shocking female criminals in history. These women prove that evil doesn't care what gender you are. As we wrap things up, let's think about what we've learned. What do all these women have in common? Is there anything that could have been done to stop them before they started killing? And how do their stories change the way we think about female criminals? Feel free to share your thoughts down in the comment section below. So next time you hear about a horrible crime, don't automatically assume it was a man who did it. As we've seen, sometimes the most shocking criminals are the ones you'd least expect. Stay safe out there, and remember, you can't judge a book by its cover, especially when that book might be hiding a serial killer inside. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, stay safe.